However, during their interview, Chance, the shelter's resident blind Cairn Terrier, had sniffed something amiss. He could read people better than any animal or person Kelsey had ever known. It was unofficial shelter policy to take Chance's reactions to potential adopters seriously. So this afternoon's appointment had been made. In this case, he'd probably been smelling the exotic birds. "I promise you, Orzo," Kelsey said as they reached her bright yellow Corolla and she clicked the remote to unlock the doors. "We're going to find you the perfect home." As soon as she had the back door open wide enough, Orzo made an impressive jump, considering his short legs, forgetting that earlier he'd needed a boost. "I'm going to make sure of it," she added, leaning in to scratch his back. She saw a pale blue tuft of down sticking up from underneath his collar and pulled it free. "And even though you had a turn last week, you're coming home with me tonight." Orzo's tail began to wag like a piano metronome set for high speed. Kelsey's decision to take a different shelter dog home every night had started by accident a few years ago. After moving out of her parents' house and renting an apartment, she was excited to adopt a shelter dog of her own. But the decision as to which dog had been nearly impossible. The 40 or so dogs in the shelter's care were each lovable and adoption-worthy. While trying to narrow her choice down to a few, she started the overnight fostering and realized she was probably doing the greatest good with the quiet night's sleep and individual attention she offered all the shelter's dogs in turn. And after this afternoon's crazy experience, Orzo deserved to be bumped to the front of the line. Kelsey shut the back door and sank into the driver's seat. Orzo circled a few times, then plopped down with a sigh. Before turning on the ignition, Kelsey checked her phone. Megan had texted to see if Kelsey would still be stopping by the Sabrina Raven estate to feed the cat who, along with an entire estate, had been bequeathed to the shelter upon Sabrina Raven's death 8 months ago. Kelsey replied that she was headed there next. She was a bit surprised when Megan texted she'd meet her there. Odd, Kelsey thought. The Raven estate was a 20-minute drive from the shelter, but close enough to Kelsey's apartment that she'd taken on the task of feeding the cantankerous cat each morning and evening. The fact that Megan wanted to meet her there on her day off had to mean there was some sort of news. Wondering if the news might involve the estate itself, Kelsey flipped on the ignition and buckled her seatbelt. Whatever it was, it certainly couldn't be as eventful as her and Orzo's afternoon had been. After all, what topped a life-size feather-filled snow globe? Hands down, it was the weather that Kurt Crawford was most looking forward to on coming home. There'd been enough times over the last 8 years when he'd found it impossible to recall the sensation of a cool breeze against his skin. Scorching heat had been an all-too-constant companion during his long military service. After completing his military training as a working dog handler in Texas at the Lackland Air Force Base, he started his enlistment in the Army doing customs support on the U.S.-Mexican border. A couple years later, he was granted a transfer to the Marines and found himself committing to multiple tours in Afghanistan and being paired up with new dog after new dog. Winters had offered a splash of reprieve from the unbearable desert heat. He'd even been in Kandahar during the one snow they'd had in 30 years. It was an experience he'd never forget. The snow had been thick and clumpy, yet dry, as if the endless desert sands had had a role in making it. Most recently, he'd been stationed in Honduras, training Honduran troops' dogs to detect IEDs. There, the weather went from hot and sticky to hot and incessantly rainy. With his 60-pound military-grade duffel hoisted over his shoulder, Kurt dodged through the crowded St. Louis airport and headed outside to passenger pickup. Fortunately, for a Midwestern day in the middle of September,